All right. Hey, this is Wild Preacher, Johnny Palmer, pastor of Calvary Baptist Church. All right, the Grace Place, Hiwasse, Arkansas. Um, we continue, Lord willing, on our study here in Ecclesiastes. And, in an interview in 2012 with the actor and film director Woody Allen, it was noted that Allen had been, quote, confronting the horrors of mortality since he was 5 years old. Well, he said this. He said, there's no advantage to aging. You don't get wiser. You don't get more mellow. You don't see life in a more glowing way. You have to fight your body decaying, and you have less options. He says the only thing you can do is what you did when you were 20, because you're always walking with an abyss right under your feet, which is to distract yourself. Getting involved in a movie occupies my anxieties. I wasn't concentrating on distractions. If I wasn't, I would be thinking of larger issues. And those aren't resolvable, and you're checkmated whichever way you go. Well, he's right about one thing. Death's doorway is always an option in life, okay? Because we never know when it's going to fling open and pull us into it. And the vanity of life is seen in the fact that we all wind up dead, okay? And we are in Ecclesiastes chapter 2 and verses 12 through, down to verse 26. So let's just kind of look at this. First of all, at death, we are followed by somebody who can do no more than we did. Verse 12 says, So I turned to consider wisdom, madness, folly, for what will the man do who will come after the king except what's already been done? The king suggests that it's folly for successive generations to make the same experiments seeking to find the same meaning to life when they can learn from Solomon that life under the sun is meaningless and there's nothing new. At best, they can only waste their time repeating what he has already done and discovering what he's already discovered. The city of Ann Arbor, Michigan, is home to one of the most fascinating museums on the planet. The faculty goes under the name of the Museum of Failed Products. And at first sight, the shelves and aisles, they kind of look like a supermarket, except there's only one of each item. And you won't find these items in a real supermarket because they're failures. They're products that were withdrawn from sale after a few weeks or maybe months because almost nobody wanted to buy them. Well, this is we could call it the consumer's capitalism's graveyard. How's that? It's the only place on the planet where you'll find things like Clairol's A Touch of Yogurt shampoo, along with Gillette's equally unpopular for oily hair only. A few feet, there's an empty bottle of Pepsi, AM Breakfast Cola, and the museum is home to discounted brands of caffeinated beer, to Fortune Snookies, a short-lived line of fortune cookies for dogs. And you'll find things like self-heating soup cans that had a tendency to explode in the consumer's face, and packets of breath mints that had to be withdrawn because they look like tiny packages of crack cocaine. Well, the book of Ecclesiastes is the museum of failed pursuits, and he's warning us not to pursue these things because they give no purpose or meaning to life. As he has discovered, he wants us to learn from his mistakes, but he knows that often we'll not. So that's the first point. Death is followed by somebody who can do no more than we did. Second of all, death must be faced by both the wise and the foolish. Verse 13 and following, he said, And I saw that wisdom exceeds folly, as life exceeds darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I know that one fate befalls them both. You know, it doesn't matter whether you're the head of the Central Intelligence Agency or a bus driver in Decatur, both the intelligent and the idiot die. And that's the truth. The truth is we all die. No one is too old to die, and no one is too young. Often called the shortest and most complete story in English, supposedly written by Ernest Hemingway. It had only 6 words. It said, "For sale, baby shoes never worn. Death comes to the strong, and it comes to the weak." It comes to us all, folks. In April 2011, Newsweek magazine featured an article about Arnold Schwarzenegger. Remember him, the movie star, former governor of California, obviously known for his weightlifting. Anyway, here are some of the most telling excerpts from that article. This was when Arnold was 63 years old. He said, I feel terrific about where I am in my life. And he said, when I look back at what I've accomplished, but I feel horrible when I look in the mirror at myself. Schwarzenegger, a 5-time Mr. Universe, 7-time Mr. Olympia. Now, the 31-inch waist is about 36 inches. And his chest, which was 57 inches, has shrunk by half a foot. He said, when I stand in front of the mirror, I really look and I wonder what in the heck happened here. 13 years ago, when he was 50, Schwarzenegger had surgery to replace a defective aortic valve. And at some point in the next several years, that valve's going to wear out, and the surgeons will split open his chest again and install a new one. He said it does quite a number on you for quite some time, because even though you're strong-willed, you know from now on you're damaged goods. And with most things, he says, I live in denial. His mentor, good friend Joe Weider, died, which was another reminder that in spite of the fact of his strength, everybody dies. You can lift weights, you can run every day, doesn't matter. Everybody dies. In his book, Spirit Life, Dr. Stuart Briscoe writes, when I moved to the United States, I was impressed with the number of total strangers that visited my house to wish me well. They all sold insurance. He said, one day my visitor was talking about the necessity to be prudent in preparation for all possibilities. He said, if something should happen to you, Mr. Briscoe, and then he started to say something. I interrupted him. He said, please don't say that. It upsets me. Well, he was a little startled, and he tried again. He said, but with all due respect, sir, we must be ready for something if something should happen to us. And he said, don't say that. He said he looked at him bewilderedly, and he said, I don't understand why it upsets you. The way he said, well, then I'll tell you. It upsets me that you talk about life's only certainty as if it's just a possibility. Death isn't a possibility. Death is a certainty. You don't say if whenever you talk about the subject of death, okay? And death is coming, and it comes to all. Death is faced by the intelligent and the idiot, the foolish and the wise. Doesn't matter. Well, thirdly, after death, all will be forgotten. Chapter 2, verse 15 and 16. Then I said to myself, as is the fate of the fool, it will also befall me. Why then have I been extremely wise? So I said to myself, this too is vanity. For there is no lasting remembrance of the wise man as with the fool, inasmuch as in the coming days all will be forgotten, and how the wise man and the fool dies alike. We will die, and we will eventually all be forgotten. Remember the movie, maybe you've seen it, it's an old one now, Citizen Kane, directed by Orson Welles. traces the life of a fictional newspaper tycoon, Charles Foster Kane, from childhood to his deathbed. Well, the film pieces together witnesses, their testimony of Kane's difficult personality and lifestyle. And anyway, as the news reporter, Jerry Thompson, tries to determine the meaning of Kane's dying words, "Rosebud," which you see throughout the film, Thompson learns that Kane, he looked for love, he looked for fulfillment in many different ways. Well, Kane rescued a dying newspaper, he married for love, and then left his first wife to pursue a relationship and then married with his mistress, and even constructed an elaborate palace, filled it with riches from all around the world. But Cain died alone and forgotten. And when he died, he thought only of Rosebud. And as the film comes to a close, Thompson walks around the basement of the palace staring at Cain's wealth, and he says, "I guess Rosebud is just a piece of the jigsaw puzzle, a missing piece." And while workers, they shovel the trash into the furnace, the camera rests on a burning pile of junk, and Cain's abandoned wooden sled burns on the top of the pile, and amid the flames, you can just make out the word on the sled, Rosebud. Well, life is like that. We're not really remembered. Everything we have eventually gets burned up, and we become just a missing piece of the jigsaw puzzle that frankly doesn't make sense. One of my favorite preachers is Charles Haddon Spurgeon. He was born in England, 1834. He became a Christian and preached his first sermon at the age of 16. At the age of 19, he preached as a guest in a famous but mostly lifeless New Park Street chapel in London. And only 200 people came to the 1,200-seated sanctuary. But by the age of 21, he had taken over full-time pastorate of the historic congregation. And within a year, North Park Street Chapel had to be enlarged to seat the crowds that came to hear him preach. Yet, still more people came to hear him preach. So in 1861, the church moved to the Metropolitan Tabernacle, which could accommodate 6,500 people. His sermons were so popular that a published printer sold one sermon each week for more than 27 years. Well, this preacher not only started orphanages to care for thousands of children, he also influenced the lives of businessmen, government officials, kings. And when he died in 1892, Spurgeon was perhaps the most famous man in all the world. One man who recently went to London to see Spurgeon's great church asked several people to direct them to Spurgeon's church. And all they could say was, "Spurgeon who?" He'd been forgotten. You know, my email is spurgeonwannabe at yahoo.com. Yahoo. I've shared this thing. Some say, what's your email address? And I tell them, and they look at me like, "What's a Spurgeon?" So it doesn't matter how famous you are. Believe me, someday you'll be forgotten, okay? And then fourth, what he found about death caused him to despair. Now, the dissatisfaction, verse 17, he said, "So I hated life, for the work which had been done under the sun was grievous to me, because everything is futility and striving after the wind." I think if we're honest, we know that life can be tiring. Amen? I wonder if you're tired. Did you know, I read this, it said the population of this country is 327.16 million people. It said some 41 million are over 65 years of age, which leaves 286 million to do the work. People under 14 years of age is over 61 million, and that leaves 225 million to do the work. It said that there are about 102 million unemployed